This meeting is being recorded.
Just a minute. Got it. Okay, I'm back on. Welcome to everybody and welcome to our guests, number one. And a few announcements before we begin the program. Thanks to all of you who have already remitted your dues. Try to please send them in before May 1. Those are the monies that help us present the wonderful programs that we have throughout the year. And without that, we wouldn't be able to do a lot of things that we do. So think of your dues, try to get them into us by the 1st of May. The nominating committee, led by our immediate past president, Eric Steele, is preparing the slate of officers for 22-23 club year. So please reach out to Eric if you are interested in learning more about open leadership sessions.
She's already started.
A really exciting bit of news, and I think we all are aware of the fact that the International Convention is scheduled to come to Indy June 8th through the 11th. This is really exciting, I think. How often do we get to host an international convention? So be sure to sign up to attend and even offer to volunteer. I need to do that. I keep saying I've got to volunteer my services, and I haven't done that yet, so I intend to do that. Indiana District is hosting a fun social Friday night, June 10th evening at the Slippery Noodle. And the links to sign in for that are in the chat box. Also, our golf outing is September 20th. That's another fun event that that's going to be happening soon. And Trina, it's up to you now to let us know what's going on in our next few meetings and share with us what you think is important.
Perfect. All of the information about the upcoming speakers are on our website, indykiwanis.org. So pop over there, keep checking for updates and additions. But we have speakers scheduled through the end of June into July and into August. Next week we'll be on Zoom. Stay tuned for an announcement around Earth Day and a great program next Thursday. Then we'll be back in person starting April 28th. David Woods, the sports writer for the Indianapolis Star, will be visiting us. May 5th, we're going to celebrate Indiana Tourism Week with a couple of special guests. And then one to please mark your calendar for May 12th, we're going to be celebrating our service leadership projects with the Key Club, Circle K, Action Club, Builders Club, and Partners in Education. As important as it is for us to hear what these primarily students are doing in their communities, it's important for them to see that we support the work that they're doing, that we value them by showing up, listening, asking questions, engaging with them. So if we can have a really tremendous turnout that day, that would mean a lot to me, I think a lot to Carol, and certainly a lot to these students. So again, visit the website for all of the upcoming meetings, but these are great ones to invite guests to, as well as enjoy yourself. Carol, back to you.
Okay. Is the 28th a Zoom meeting, or is that in person?
April 28th will be in person.
At the Columbia Club?
Yep.
Okay.
Most over the next couple of months, we will be back together, thankfully.
Great. Yeah, it's more fun to meet in person than by Zoom, although especially with my aging computer, I have to be real careful about getting in and getting out. So Graham is now going to introduce our speaker, Jerald Harkness.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. I hope you are doing well. It's a real honor for me to introduce Jerald. We've recently become acquainted. I had reached out to him regarding shameless plug, my book coming out in October, Unbracketed, available on Amazon.com, $23.99. I'll stop there. But Jerald, one of the key segments of this book is on the 1963 game of change between Loyola Chicago and Mississippi State University. It's really a powerful story that I won't go into, but Jerald's father, Jerry Harkness, who in my research was a better man off the court than on the court, and he was quite a player. We became acquainted there, and I'm going to read his biography, though there's quite a few accomplishments on here, so I may need to condense it a little bit. But Jerald Harkness has been an active member of the Indianapolis production community since 1991. He is currently CEO of JTM Media, a company that specializes in the development and production of original shows for the web and global broadcast outlets. He's got 18 years of video production experience. His first documentary, Steppin', in 1992, won the National Educational Gold Apple Award, making it eligible for an Academy Award nomination. Steppin' was also the 1994 Pan-African People's Choice Award. And his second documentary, Facing the Facade, won the Indiana Film Festival's Best Documentary and People's Choice Award. He produced the documentary Game of Change, which I highly recommend. And you can also find on Amazon. That was the original documentary depicting the Game of Change and its importance. It was selected for the 2008 Heartland Film Festival. Other broadcasting credits include Living as a Legend, the Damon Bailey story, The Men of Montford Point, The First Black Marines, and Eyewitness to a Century, the Indianapolis Recorder newspaper. His, again, also credits include The Al Unser Story for the Emmy Award-winning Sports Century series for ESPN Classics, 7 Days Left with Queen Latifah for VH1, and the Andy Gibbs Story for A&E Biography. 1994, he was selected by the Indianapolis Business Journal for their under 40 edition. He's a graduate of Cathedral High School, state champs this year, who we met a couple weeks ago, and has a degree from Indiana University. He's husband to Barbara and the proud father of two. Having said that, I'm going to turn it over to Jerald for what promises to be an inspirational presentation today.
Graham, thanks, man. You took my first 5 minutes. I didn't think you were going to read that, so you've already cut my time. But no, thanks for having me, everybody. Like I said, I'm going to be doing something a little bit different. Usually, when I'm asked to speak, it's about a specific project. But in getting to know Graham and Trina a little bit, I wanted to actually go into my background of growing up in Indianapolis and how that kind of informed me as a filmmaker. And like Graham said, I've been actually doing this for 30 years. I tell everybody I started when I was 5, but no one buys that. But and it's been quite a journey, working with ESPN and VH1 and A&E Biography and Paramount TV and Urban Movie Channel and PBS and a number of outlets. Hollywood and the media and the entertainment industry is a really trippy place, to say the least. And the ironic thing about that, as crazy as Hollywood can be, I get really razzed for working and living in Indianapolis. People are always like, why do you live there? And there's not much of an industry there. You guys do sports stuff, but you really don't do too much content. And so in thinking about talking to you guys today, it kind of hit me that if it wasn't for growing up in Indianapolis, I don't think I would be the filmmaker that I am today. Because when you take on a project, the biggest question you have to ask yourself as a filmmaker is what is the perspective? What is the point of view? How am I going to tell this story? From what eyes or from what, like I say, character am I going to tell this story? And so thinking about this, I kind of discovered something about myself in that like growing up in the 1970s here in Indianapolis, you wouldn't think it, but we're not known for this, but I had a really diverse upbringing. I grew up on the north side of Indianapolis off Wellington Road, which is between Hoover and Spring Mill and 71st and 64th Street. And it was a real thriving African-American community. It was really tight knit. We were really close, and I got to see all kinds of different, I would say it's like middle to upper class African-American families living there. We had doctors, and we had engineers, and we had insurance agents, and we had at the time the number one R&B DJ in the country, and Super J Johnson. Graham, I promised I'd put some sports into this little talk. So we had a number of ex-placers who lived in our neighborhood, like Darnell Hillman and George McGinnis and Mel Daniels. And I'll always value growing up in that neighborhood because it gave me such a sense of self-worth, and it kind of reaffirmed my understanding of myself because, I was around people who looked like me and had a similar culture to me. But what was great about growing up in that area, especially in the 70s and 80s, is that there was a lot of Jewish families in the neighborhood as well, not only on our street, but in the surrounding neighborhood. And at that time, I don't know if it was like an unspoken rule, I don't know if it was a rule or not, but African-American families, we just didn't go to the country clubs that were in that area. I won't say their names because I'm sure that's changed. But so we all went to the Jewish Community Center. And I knew that people looked differently than I did, but going to the Jewish Community Center, I got to discover that people, I knew they look differently, like I said, but they think differently, or their faith is different. But we're all still really getting along really well. And I just, I got to know what kosher food was, and I got an idea of when Jewish holidays were. There were a couple of Holocaust survivors that were at the Jewish Community Center and in my neighborhood, and getting to understand the trauma and horrors that they survived. I was really fascinated by them. And, I grew up Catholic, so of course we always went to church on Sundays, but in the neighborhood, we saw everyone always walking to their respective temples. And so that I just really appreciated and valued that perspective that, again, growing up African-American, there's going to be people looking differently than you, but understanding that people had different perspectives, is really impressive to me. But I also think that the biggest impact on how I tell stories was the grade school I went to. I don't know if we have any Lukers in the house, St. Luke Catholic School on the north side. But that's why I went to school. And I was very fortunate, very blessed to have amazing classmates that I still adore, amazing teachers that I adore. But to say St. Luke was predominantly white is like understating it. It was white. And there was me and another African-American student, my first through eighth grade, but he was African-American, but he was adopted by a white family. And I think that was kind of a tough environment for him to grow up in. He didn't grow up the way I grew up. So as much as I love St. Luke, the one thing that I loved about it was I was always going to stand out. I was the unique guy. This is the 70s. So, I had hair back then. I had an afro. I was always different that way. It's hard to believe it now, but I did. Sometimes the food that I ate was different than my classmates. Some of the things that we did musically and dancing and stuff like that was different. And I always remember during summer break, I'd hang out a lot in Chicago with my cousins and stuff. And I always try to get hip to like the latest sayings and slang and stuff like that. And so coming back to school, I try to be all cool in front of everybody. And I'm pretty sure I'm the first person in St. Luke history to say, man, that dude is tripping. And everybody's like, wow, what's that coming from? So I love being different. I love being kind of standing out. I was absolutely fully accepted, but I was always also different. We also did a lot of different creative writing. And I think that's that's where I really got excited about storytelling, because in that creative writing, I knew every time that I wrote a story, it was going to be unique. It was hopefully going to stand out. It was going to be different than the rest of the students. And so that background really informed the type of filmmaker I became. I've always tried to get the perspective that's not necessarily the mainstream perspective, or the perspective that's been quite over, that's most often overlooked. So all that said, and thank you, Trina, for including this clip, because when I saw Graham's email talking about my dad and sports, I was like, oh, I gotta include a sports clip. So the first clip that I like to share with you guys is a clip from what Graham mentioned, the documentary Game of Change. And what was different about Game of Change is that I did it from the Mississippi State perspective. The documentary takes place in Mississippi in the early 60s, from like 1960 to 1963. And as most of you know, those were horrific times of racial tensions and racial violence. And that racial tensions and violence has been very well documented. But when my dad and I were talking about this project, he and I both felt like the Mississippi State story was very intriguing. What happens to a white community when you have racism, when you have Jim Crow? What kind of discriminations do they face? What kind of setbacks do they face? And so Mississippi State was a basketball juggernaut. In 61 and in 62, they were the best team in the SEC. They were better than Adolph Rupp's Kentucky teams. And they won the SEC. But because of the Jim Crow rules, and because they weren't allowed to play against teams that had African-American players, they were denied the chance to play in the NCAA tournament, which always felt tragic to me. And again, I can't compare what Mississippi State went through to what maybe African-Americans went to, but in studying history, you really should try to study as many perspectives as possible. So, you know, it was a joy to work on this project. It was very, very challenging, felt a lot of pressure of trying to please a lot of people, as you usually do. But I learned so much about what it was like to be white in that time frame, and also to be denied what was rightfully yours, denied the chance to play into the NCAA tournament. So the clip we have is really quick, and it's the right before the start of the game, with the handshake between Dad, who played for Loyola Chicago, who had 4 African-American starters, the first college basketball team to win the tournament to have that many starters. And then with Joe Gold, who was the captain of Mississippi State. This is just a quick clip about right before the beginning of the game, I believe. So.
I apologize. I'm not sure what happened with the audio there. I'll get that fixed before our next clip.
No problem. Yeah, I was like, oh man, is it me or is there audio? No problem, Trina. And so anyway, that clip is kind of a memorable clip because the handshake between Dad and Jodan Gold was kind of like the symbol of those two teams coming together, and it's one of my favorite clips of any project that I've ever done. And the good thing about that is that Dad and Jodan Gold hadn't seen each other since that game in 1963, and through the documentary Game of Change, they ended up becoming friends. Unfortunately, Jodan passed away, and then Dad passed away last summer. But they got to enjoy a friendship, and the families have actually become pretty tight. So anyway, so that was that clip. Maybe we can show it near the end because I'll probably have time. So there's that. And so, and keeping in line with telling stories that go down the path less traveled. As Graham mentioned, I graduated from Indiana University, and like my experience at St. Luke and even at Cathedral and at IU, I'm really grateful for the education, the experiences, the friendships, just how wonderful going to IU was for me. But at the same time, this is in the late 80s, early 90s. I was really bothered that the student life and the culture and especially socially, things were just so, what I would call self-segregated. People stayed pretty much in their own tribes, whether it be a fraternity or sorority, or if they're on a sports team, or if they're African American or Hispanic or white or whatever. And I saw a lot of, I felt a lot of my co-students at IU who are African American really felt like they never really had a voice, or they felt like they felt overlooked for whatever reasons. And so for my second documentary, and keep in mind I was like 24 when I did this, so it's production value isn't what it is today. But I did a simple I call it a simple documentary. I did a documentary called Facing the Facade, where we talked to 8 African-American students and what their experience was like going to Indiana University. And this came out in 1994. And it had been probably one of my least popular documentaries. Stuff like Game of Change or Steppin' or Damon Bailey or Al Unser or a lot of other stuff seemed to be far more popular. And then in 2020, with the murder of George Floyd, I was contacted by Indiana University, and they said, well, can we re-release Facing the Facade? And that was very, very bittersweet for me, because on the one hand, it's always flattering when people want to watch your work. But then the bitter part of it was, wow, what I was talking about back then, a lot of students are saying are still relevant today. So it's always been a bittersweet situation for me. So at any rate, I think we have a clip of Facing the Facade. And this is just a montage of the different students just sharing various experiences. I think it's about 5, it's almost six minutes, so.
They come from small towns and big cities. Some are of modest means, and some are better off than most Americans. They are African-American students attending white universities. Sooner or later, they all face the facade. A facade of truth, a facade of understanding, a facade of justice. They are led to believe, and most want to believe, that there are no problems here. The college campus. It is a place of learning, a place to grow. It is a place filled with optimism and hope, a place where dreams might come true. It is also a place where things appear better than they are. Since 1985, signs of racial intolerance and racial conflict on college campuses nationwide have been increasing. This is an alarming situation. since one would hope that places of learning would be the ideal place where different races, religions, and cultures might best be tolerated and understood. This is a story about the lives and experiences of 8 African-American students attending Indiana University in Bloomington, Indiana. It is their perspective that is most often misrepresented and most often misunderstood. It is their story that reveals the unfortunate realization that even at institutions of higher education, race still matters.
I mean, what I found is that the majority of the students that are down here, being that they're white people, I mean, or definitely not black for that matter, all they know about black people coming from the small towns in Indiana University is drawing apart largely upon the population of Indiana. You know, some of the people that are in the suburbs of Chicago and suburbs of Cincinnati and neighboring states, but they haven't had any direct exposure to black people. I mean, all they know about black people is that we can play basketball and that we dance real cool and that we do something weird to our cars and listen to loud music and things like that. And I mean, understanding now, I understood that they just didn't have any exposure to us. But instead of, you know, coming to you and asking and finding out, they would like sit back at a distance and kind of like make assumptions.
I call it my checkout counter experience, simply because it happened to me, the times that it's happened to me has been while I was at a checkout counter somewhere. I happened to be at a drugstore, and I was making an early morning run for a prescription. I'll just put it that way. And as I was walking out, and I was about to pay for it, the woman told me how much it cost, and I looked down to write my check, and she grabs my hair. Now, this is a Saturday morning. I'm in a bad mood, and this woman grabs my hair and says, "Oh my God, this is beautiful. How do you do this?" Because I had braids in my hair. Well, that's fine, but don't touch me. And since I've been in Bloomington, I think I've seen that white or Europeans take liberties with African Americans that we would never take with them. I would never walk up to someone who was white and put my hand in their hair and say anything or touch them without knowing them. And I think that whites do that. And whether they consciously know that it's a part of the structure, the racial structure that's set up in this country, or not, is a different issue. But for the most part, when I think about it, I attribute it to the fact that we came to this country as slaves, and we're here, but we've all, I mean, to a certain extent, the country has always looked at us as second-class citizens, even though now we have certain rights and things like that. And so people feel like they can take liberties with African Americans or Hispanics or whatever that they would never do to someone else who was white.
Student life, well, I guess I kind of got off to a bad note because I had a roommate my freshman year, and her parents were from Kentucky. Her grandparents were from Kentucky, and she told me when she came in, I guess we both had our own, you know, we were always kind of set in our ways, and she told me that she only had, I think, like 3 black people in her high school, so automatically I was like, oh, hell, you know, what am I going to do, you know? So we finally got past that, but she would never outwardly call me nigger or, you know, I guess be degrading in an outward manner, but just little things that she would do showed it very obvious that she thought she was more than I was, where, you know, even though we were both paying the same room and board fee, it was her room, and I was just, you know what I mean, it was my privilege to be living with her, you know, whereas it finally came down to the point where my cousins visited from Gary, and they left on Sunday and she left on Wednesday, so I got my own room, so that worked out real good.
And then we got on the subject of Anthony and Cleopatra were reading that play. And I was like, you know, I raised my hand. I was like, this is an interracial play. You know, Anthony, who's from Rome, he's a white man, and Cleopatra is from Egypt. She's a black woman. She's an African. He was like, no, Cleopatra is more European. I was like, what do you mean? I said, she's African. No, I would say she's not Negroid. And I was like, wait a minute. I said, what do you mean? He's like, I wouldn't say she was Negroid. I would say she's more brown. I was like, I'm brown. What do you mean? I said, our culture goes from the very light to the very dark. I said, what do you mean? Just because she is such a figure of high establishment and everyone, you know, Cleopatra, you know what I'm saying? She can be black. I bet if I asked him, I said, you know, if the slaves or the servants in the play, were they black? Oh, yeah, sure. That's what he would have said, you know what I'm saying?
Wow, I hadn't seen that clip in a while. Yeah, again, watching that clip, I was 24, and I call it my creative adrenaline days because I didn't really know what I was doing, and I didn't have much of a filter. But I remember being appreciative on how candid everybody was with their sound bites and with their perspectives. And I ruffled a few feathers with that documentary. I didn't want to, but it ended up happening. But again, like I said earlier, it's bittersweet that people are kind of recognizing it now. But it sometimes upsets me that contemporary students relate to it so well. But again, that goes in line with me trying to tell a story from a perspective that just is quite often overlooked. And so my last clip is from a documentary series of short documentaries called The Election Effect. And a little bit of quick background about that. It's a longer clip. I think it's about 8 to 9 minutes. So I was hired by a really prestigious documentary company called Shine Global. They've won Academy Awards and Emmys, and they're a huge player in the documentary business. And I was hired to create a short documentary about how the 2016 presidential election affected students. And knowing that knowing that Hollywood is usually kind of pretty liberal and progressive leaning, I was concerned that it doesn't even matter what my political affiliations are. I was concerned that most of the filmmakers were from either New York or Philadelphia, that everyone will be telling stories from a liberal, progressive perspective. So I lobbied. I was like, I would really like to tell a story from the perspective of a conservative student. I'm very curious to see what he or she went through during the 2016 election. As we know, that's an incredibly polarizing, delicate, difficult topic to tackle. And I knew if I didn't handle it a certain way, I could probably do more damage than I did good. And so this clip, I'll be really interested to hear your guys' feedback, because just as Facing the Facade came out in 1994 and is still relevant today, this clip, I've noticed it really can inflict emotions. So anyway, so a quick background. So The Election Effect is about Wesley, who you see on screen. He was a high school student at the time in Nashville, Tennessee, at a high school that was very diverse, and most of the students were progressive. So here is The Election Effect with Wesley.
How do you feel about graduating?
I'm excited, a little nervous about moving on and one step closer to the real world. Coming from not only a school that was very conservative, very religious, but also from a background, from a family that was like that as well. I've definitely been challenged at Hume Fogg. When I go and talk to my friends from private school, they're always like, how are you holding up with all those liberals up there?
Hume Fogg is a place where people with various political views, and religious views, and several different ideologies come here to mix.
Hume Fogg draws from all over the city, whereas most public schools just draw from a single neighborhood or zip code.
You see a bunch of people from different cultures and different backgrounds, yet they're all educated and they all work together to become something greater than what they are.
It pushes me because there are people with diverse thoughts and a lot of people who are really passionate about what they believe in.
If you're a conservative or Republican, like, you keep it on the down low. Like, you do not want anyone to know because, like, you are afraid. Your friends aren't going to be your friend anymore.
One of my friends was wearing a Make America Great Again hat, and people were shunning him or telling him, you shouldn't be wearing that, what's wrong with you? That was something I didn't think was quite right, because I'd seen people, you know, with Hillary buttons, and I never saw anything wrong with that.
I got a ticket to the Trump rally when Trump was in Nashville. I didn't print it off at home, so I was in my 5th period study hall and I was like, oh, I have to print my ticket off. I was like, hopefully no one sees it. I was scared that people were gonna judge me for it, be like, oh, you are a racist, you wanna ship me back to my country. Like, no, that's not at all what I'm trying to do, and that's not all I think. If you don't believe in what the majority believes in, you're wrong.
The day after the election, I came into my AP Stat class and we just cried. And a lot of kids I remember didn't stand up for the Pledge of Allegiance. I was one of those kids.
You could just see through the hallway the day after the election, even some teachers at the school, they were in tears.
Teachers that I have a lot of respect for went out of their way to say, well, I can't believe what just happened. If you voted for Trump, you're a bigot, or you're a racist, or you're xenophobic. And that really hurt me.
People I don't even talk to anymore, don't even like look at in the hallway just over what happened.
Not all, but a lot of my friends on the left, they're very tolerant and accepting when it comes to people they agree with. But that's true of almost everyone. That's a lot of the critiques that liberals usually have towards conservatives. So I can certainly respect someone who has differing opinions than me. It's very hard for me to respect a hypocrite.
We thought the real world is like Hume Fog, with all these different groups interacting with one another, and that everyone has this certain level of respect. But then this election showed that that just wasn't true. And I think that that really shook us in a way that really changed things.
There are strong divisions in this country. So in my future career, I hope to help begin to mend those divisions, and it starts by just talking to people. I don't think that there is a media outlet that properly covers moderate conservatives, center-right conservatives, which in my opinion are your mainstream conservatives. And that's frustrating.
Well, Congressman Cooper, thank you so much for joining us here on our mock election day.
Wesley, I think, has done an outstanding job as the editor-in-chief of the Nightly News.
Because of a lot of the things that your mayor's office did.
What I've always admired about him is his ability to criticize both sides.
They interview students, and their articles are very student opinionated, and so that gives us a chance for us to have our voices heard.
Some of his writings have probably spurred conversations that needed to happen.
You get to learn a lot about your school because you're talking to people that you otherwise wouldn't talk to, and learning about things you otherwise wouldn't learn about.
People think that conservatives and liberals is like the good people and the bad people. But that's not really the case, because there's good people who are liberals and bad people who are liberals, good people who are conservatives, bad people who are conservatives. It's more about the person than about the ideology.
There's plenty of students in this building who I would vehemently disagree with on many issues, but I just love them as people. We respect each other's right to hold our opinions and to exist.
All it takes is you paying attention
And the sound be turned up.
and going out and getting involved, and that is a very powerful thing.
Our teachers have been really good about showing everybody, if you don't like how things are going, well, don't sit here and cry about it. Start learning and start, being active in your community.
Here at Hume Fog, since the election, we've tried to have influence in the community, make change. So the Muslim Student Association, what we do at this school is making events for the community, kind of informing the public about the true meaning of Islam.
Most importantly, the very first female to be elected here as mayor of Nashville, Mayor Megan Berry.
Within our Environmental Action Club, we had created Livable Schools. It's an initiative that tries to integrate Megan Berry's Livable Nashville program within schools. We're going to do that through community service, group hours, group action, really something that to benefit our community.
I am the co-president of Stop Take Notice, which is an advocacy group here, and we work a lot with local government and public works trying to make sure that our traffic infrastructure is the best that it can be in the downtown core.
We do International Day. We try to show different cultures and teach people about the backgrounds of various students.
Our librarian was talking about how she's going to try and get a Republican and Democrat table together, and so we can talk about our politics together. So I believe once that is working, they'll kind of understand both sides a little better.
Inclusiveness and communal integrity really is what drives Hume Fog. Our cosmopolitan atmosphere is really what makes students feel safe in a school environment, and that's what I want to see in a nation.
There is no more important thing that we can do for our young children than to give them a good education. We have to have this conversation as a country, I think, of where we go in our education system. A lot of parents at private schools are afraid to send their kids to public schools that are going to have black students, Hispanic students, low-income students. But I think our best schools are the ones like Hume Fog, where you have rich students, middle-class students, lower-income students, white, black, Hispanic, Asian American, Muslim Americans. In my future career, I'd hope that I can have an impact on education reform. I certainly hope to encourage conversation again with people, because I still believe that we are more alike than we are different.
Okay, so that was the election effect. That was one episode of five episodes, and mine was the only one that dealt with kind of a conservative perspective. A little side note: this has never happened to me before. I was talking to students about filmmaking, and I showed the election effect, and it was a Zoom environment like this, and so the part where the Trump flags came up, someone like took I don't know what they took, like a pen, and they started scraping on the screen. I was like, man, I've never been crayoned as a filmmaker before. So I know that election effect can really create a lot of different emotions, but hopefully with all the clips, I know we didn't get a chance to see Game and Change that much, but with all the clips, I really enjoy trying to take the harder route. I don't really like telling the easier story. I want a story that is going to make me feel a little bit uncomfortable. It's going to challenge me. I question myself if I can pull it off. So those are some examples of projects like that with my career. So you guys have heard enough of me. I am happy to open it up to questions if anyone has any questions.
Hey, Trina, can we try the Loyola clip one more time?
On March 15th, 1963, the Mississippi State Bulldogs and the Loyola Ramblers of Chicago took the floor for the historic...
Can we turn the sound up again?
I don't know how many fans. The place was packed, and probably a third of the people had cameras.
We knew it was a significant story because there was more press there than there ordinarily would be. When they walked out, the captains, Jerry Harkness and Joe Gold from Mississippi State, to shake hands.
I looked the captain of Mississippi State in the face, and we smiled at each other and kind of did a little small nod, not really realizing what was taking place.
I went out as the captain to shake hands with Jerry Harkness. I do remember singing like the flash bulbs went off.
Bulbs were just popping all over the place.
I remember the two guys being illuminated at half court.
The place lit up like Mayor Daley's Christmas tree in Chicago. It was just everybody had a flash bulb.
But when those bulbs popped and everything, and I felt the tension, I said, oh, this is more than a game. This is more than a game.
Okay, so hopefully everyone saw that and was able to hear that clip with Mississippi State playing Dad's team, Loyola Chicago. So again, thanks for allowing me to share those clips and kind of reminisce about some of the stuff that I've done over the years. And again, happy to have answer any questions.
So Jerald, we got one on what project are you working on now?
Yeah, I'm doing a documentary about an African-American college football player from the late 40s, early 50s named Johnny Bright, who's actually from Fort Wayne and had some amazing accomplishments at Drake University his sophomore and junior year, and then something pretty egregious happened to him his senior year. So that one should be out late August. I think we're going to do a local screening, and then I think it's going to be distributed maybe by PBS nationally. And then I'm doing a smaller documentary about an African-American neighborhood in Indianapolis that's going to be shown at the Can Theater sometime in May. That's why I didn't get a chance to really rehearse my speech, because I'm editing both projects this week. It's been pretty crazy. So yeah, fortunate to be keeping busy and have other deals we're trying to get done in the next couple of months.
I so appreciate you doing this and helping challenge us to think and maybe engage a little bit differently. Question for you: how do you decide what to say yes to or what to say no to?
That's a great question. Used to really depend on my financial situation, to be quite honest. I was saying yes quite a bit back in the day. It's story in the crew. It's got to be a story that I can commit my life to for anywhere from 6 months to 15 months, and you just got to work with the right people, the right videographer, the right editors, the right co-producers. And I really do try to make it a fun experience, because telling a story is a privilege. It's not easy. It's very, very hard to get a broadcast deal. It's very, very hard to get a project greenlit. So if you are able to do that, then let's enjoy it. And I really approach it like a sports GM, where I really try to get the best cast of characters to work with me, and me as a producer director, I really strive to get the best out of everybody. So I do try to create a safe environment, like you mentioned earlier, Trina, and because the creative process is hard. I know you know that. So yeah, it's usually story, and it's usually the people I'm working with.
Hey, Jerald, this has been terrific. And before the season comes up, as a thanks, you definitely have a couple more tickets to a Butler game. Jerald brought us good luck last year for the game. I want to go back to the Loyola, the game of change.
Yeah.
Two things here. Can you articulate just how bad the racism was that your dad and his teammates faced? The Houston story, the St. Louis story, the letters that your dad got before the tournament. And then the second question would be the resurgence in the last 5 years of the Loyola program. Can you talk about, that's been great for the program, but it's really brought this story back to life. If you could touch on those two.
Well, with the racism part, you're absolutely right, Graham. I grew up learning about it. It was part of my fabric. Dad reminisced quite a bit about what he faced, the challenges he faced. Dad was, rest his soul, but we were incredibly tight. And so he was very candid with me. I think the racism affected him more than it affected other people. Dad was from New York, as was Ronnie Miller, but less, his other teammates were from the Deep South. So they were kind of used to the poor treatment that they received. It really shook Dad up. And I think that experience resonated with him throughout his life. On the plus side, as you know, Graham, sports has this magical way of uniting people and sometimes bringing out the best in people. And to this date, Loyola is the only team from Illinois to have won the NCAA tournament. Trust me, if Dad was here now, he'd let you guys know it. He was very, very proud of that fact. And so as much as it was challenging for Dad, he really relished how the city embraced him, how it did unite people. And so as bad as it was, he looked back at it as a positive experience. And then, you know, there's been a lot of documentation. You know, I wish I had trademarked Game of Change, because that's what everyone calls it now. It was literally, the title came from a 5-minute conversation I had with the NCAA, because they were like, hey, we need a DVD cover. What's the title? I was like, let's just call it Game of Change. And now everyone calls it. But with Game of Change, with the Loyola Project, Graham, that you hosted at Butler, there's been a number of other documentaries about Loyola. There's been a number of books. You know, that story really seems to resonate with people, which deservedly so. I know Texas Western gets credit for having 5 Black starters win the NCAA tournament, which was in 1966, I believe. But I'm biased. I think Loyola's story is a lot better. But it's great to see the resurgence, the interest. People, Game of Change is still probably my most popular title. So yeah, it's cool when you do stuff and it kind of hits a chord with people.
One last thing, and then I'll stop talking here.
No, you're good, man.
I think many may not know the amazing backstory of who discovered your dad playing in a YMCA when he was in high school. If you could share that.
So let me put it this way. My father was an amazing storyteller. He loved movies, as did my mom, and that's what influenced me. So Dad had a way of possibly embellishing things, if we're being real with each other. And so it's true that Dad was at the YMCA in the Bronx or Harlem, and Dad's childhood hero, Jackie Robinson, showed up at like an open gym. And Jackie spoke to the group, and I believe he said something to the effect of, who knows, you could be you can make it in athletics if you work hard and if you do well. Now, whether or not Jackie was speaking directly to Dad or to the group, I can't verify. Dad's given me both versions, but people love the story so much, and this is a rarity. I usually don't tell both versions. People love the story so much that I usually just go with the version that Graham just said, in that Jackie kind of discovered Dad and Dad having some talents. But Dad was as great an athlete as he was, and as great of a civic leader as he was. Dad was a phenomenal storyteller, and Dad's also known for having the longest shot in ABA history. And if you hear him tell that story, it'll blow you away. It's he threw the ball the length of the court and made the shot when he was playing for the Indiana Pacers. But Dad put his own little seasoning on the story, so the Jackie Robinson story and the story of Dad having the longest shots, he loved telling those stories. So whatever the case, Jackie Robinson was a huge influence on my father. So
I'm using your dad's version in my book.
Yeah.
So I hope that's okay.
You got it, man. We're rolling
Hey,
with
Jerald, this is Bill Du Bois. I can tell you, I remember watching your dad play in the NCAA tournament.
Wow.
In 1963. I was a senior in high school and playing high school basketball then. And it was great. Your dad played so well. And he's what I call a smooth player. Like Oscar Robinson, who I also saw play in high school. Just so smooth. Everything looked like it didn't take much effort. Certainly when I played, it took a lot of effort. And so then, of course, he played for the Pacers and also was a broadcaster for many years here in Indianapolis. I enjoyed listening to him give the sports stuff. And of course, here in Indiana, we love our basketball heroes. So it was great.
I appreciate that. Thank you. Thank you very much. Yeah, Dad was a pioneer with I believe he was the first African-American sportscaster in Indianapolis. And I remember he introduced me to the guy who was his weather guy. Dad did weekends, and there was a guy who was doing weather with Dad. And I remember looking at the guy and I was like, man, he looks like Shaggy, Scooby-Doo. He was tall and lanky. And that guy was David Letterman. So David Letterman was Dad's weatherman for a little while. So
Yeah.
little Indianapolis trivia there. So
Yeah. I want to comment also on the documentary that you did with the redheaded guy going to college. I thought that was extremely well done. It's so hard to, especially these days, to do politics and kind of well represent both sides.
Yeah,
which was done quite well. So
thank you very much. Yeah, that means more to me than you know. I remember my executive producers contacted me one day, and they got a note from a conservative viewer who said, "Thank you for representing my perspective as well as you did," and that made my day because again, doesn't matter what my politics are. I'm there to serve the story and there to be fair. And there to hopefully bring out the best in the stories. And again, I know Election Effect, it's one of those too early projects, but hopefully it'll age well to where hopefully the uplifting ending, makes sense in modern day. So thank you for saying that. That means a lot.
There a last question before we turn it back to Carol to close us out. Carol, it's all you.
Well, one thing that I would say, Jerald, is that you have certainly inherited your father's gift of storytelling. That was a wonderful presentation. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Carol. And I'm glad I wasn't late. You scared me when I first jumped on here. So
we are going to make a donation in your name, in your honor, to the Indiana Youth Group. And this is a group that creates safer spaces for foster community, the foster community, and provides also programming, empowering LGBTQ and youth, and magnifies the voices of those young people. Once again, Jerald, thank you for joining us today. Fascinating presentation.
Thanks, guys. Thanks for putting up with my kind of ad-lib speech there. I didn't get a chance to really rehearse it. But thanks, Trina, for putting up with me. Thanks, Graham, for inviting me. It's really been an honor. Thank you so much.
Have a great end of the week, everybody, and see you next week. And thanks again, Jerald. Wonderful presentation.